Hello and welcome to another episode of For Your Consideration. I'm your host, Mike Josick. Thanks for joining me. Now you may notice there's another name and another voice missing. My esteemed co-host, Dustin Friesenhan, is not here. And while that may be unfortunate, fortunately, he's here in audio, if not in body. And I'll explain that. This is not a brand new episode per se. I recently posted on Facebook that we were going to take a little bit of time off for the summer, a lot of things going on, and kind of felt bad about that afterwards and sort of wanted to get some new content out there. Also, we just found out that through our Libsyn services, we are now going to be available on iHeartRadio, which could potentially broaden our listening base, which is great. And there's a handful of episodes that sort of feel like they're just collecting dust. And with the need for content and people coming in fresh, we thought it might be fun to go back, revisit some of these episodes, maybe even do a little bit of tidying up since we've kind of changed our style of cutting and some of the earlier episodes have some rough production on them. Unfortunately, I was unable to do anything about the audio quality of each particular episode, so while content may have been tightened, audio quality remains the same as its original broadcast. I'm happy with how it turned out, and I hope you are too. So for the first episode of FYC Redux, we're going to be revisiting Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was previously our 11th episode and was originally broadcast on April 10th, 2016. I'll roll that audio and see you on the other side. Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello and welcome to For Your Consideration, a podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm Mike Josick.
And I'm Dustin Friesenhan.
Thanks for joining us. On this episode, we're going to be covering the first feature-length animated film of all time, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
AKA that movie where everybody is what their names are, and apparently the greatest thing in the world to be is white.
Okay, the list of people that worked on this film is actually quite long, so I'm going to try and power through it quickly. Supervising director was David Hand, also directed by William Cottrell, Wilfred Jackson, Larry Morey, Percy Pierce, and Ben Sharpstein. The film was produced by Walt Disney, written by Ted Sears, Richard Creedon, Otto Englander, Dick Rickard, Earl Hurd, Merrill Damaris, Dorothy Ann Blank, and Webb Smith. It was based on Snow White by the Brothers Grimm, and starred Adriana Caselotti, Lucille Laverne, Harry Stockwell, Roy Atwell, Pinto Colvig, Otis Harlan, Scotty Matraw, Billy Gilbert, Eddie Collins, Maroney Olson, and Stuart Buchanan. Music was by Frank Churchill, Paul Smith, Lee Hairline, and it was distributed by RKO Radio Pictures. The film got wide release in the US on February 4th, 1938, and was received quite well. It places it number 34 on AFI's Top 100 list, and is considered the number one greatest animated film of all time. Dustin, what did you think?
My first thought was that there's not really much at all going on here. You had to power through this list of all these writers. They used half the Snow White story, which is about 2 pages to begin with. I mean, it's beautifully animated. It is fantastically animated. Apparently, it nearly bankrupted Walt Disney Productions completely, which is not surprising. Rotoscopy, normally I find it a little off-putting, but it was pretty fantastic, especially for the Queen, the scene at the end when she's running away. It was glorious.
Just to qualify, you made a comment about the writers. On this film, and this is true of a lot of animated projects, the writers are actually the storyboard artists who are breaking down each of the sequences. So the writing credits are going to the storyboard artists who are responsible for each individual sequence of the film. Although I'm guessing that Walt Disney, as the producer and the supervising director, were probably coordinating things and making sure that everything kind of gelled together.
In that case, that's different. And you learn something new every day.
And honestly, I don't think it gelled together.
It was a number of sequences that they just sort of put together. Most of it was songs, but the one thing that really has to be considered is that back in the day, animation, it was not taken seriously at all. Like, you look at Steamboat Willie, it's just a mouse driving a steamboat and whistling. Like this, that was what it was. So when you translate that over to feature-length film, it's not exactly going to be the greatest film of all time, but that's what people are calling it.
You commented that you felt that the film held up visually. And I agree. I haven't seen this movie in a long time, and Snow White has never been one of my favorite movies. If I was to pick an early Disney film that I thought should probably take this place, it would be Sleeping Beauty. But the animation was quite good. The rotoscoping, again, normally very off-putting for me as well. But I enjoyed it, and I was surprised at how well it held up. My biggest problem with this movie was there was about 3 minutes of actual story. And to be fair, I enjoyed the 3 minutes of actual story. Anytime the Queen was talking to the huntsman or the mirror or things were actually driving plot forward, I was engaged. But then it would slip into a song and things would just happen. And honestly, actually, that might be hyperbole saying that things just happen, because I don't really think much happens in this movie. And it happens over the course of, 24 or 36 hours?
If that. She spends one night by the looks of it, and the next day the witch comes by while the dwarves are out at work, who are informed immediately by the animals, and it's non-stop slapstick comedy with the dwarves and the animals. They come back, and they're all just distraught that this marvelous woman who cooked and cleaned and sang and was pretty and was everything a woman should be, I guess. They decided, let's keep her in a glass coffin, and the prince comes by apropos of nothing, and upon seeing a beautiful corpse, does the only logical thing and makes out with it. I mean, that's what I do every time I see a pretty body lying in a puddle or a ditch somewhere, isn't it? It's a fairy tale, so you got to forgive that. It's just a little ridiculous, I think.
I actually thought, even for a fairy tale, it pushed a little bit of the suspension of disbelief for me, because yes, it's a fairy tale, but Snow White is singing into the wishing well, wishing for a prince. The prince comes by, jumps over the wall, he says hi, sings the last line of the song. And I'm willing to give the movie the benefit of the doubt in that we don't know what happened with Snow White and the prince. They might have had a conversation, they might have had tea, they might have played cricket, I don't know. So there may have been the beginnings of a relationship, but what we get from seeing the film, there is no relationship being built. And then the next time you hear his name mentioned, it's Snow White talking to the dwarves, and talking about this guy that she met, who she's totally in love with. And I don't know, maybe I'm old and jaded, this is supposed to be a kid's movie, but I just didn't buy it. And I'm kind of willing to accept that, Creepy Charming comes riding by on his horse, and there's this dead, cute lady sitting in a coffin. Oh, and by the way, lady is not a good word to use, because Snow White is 14 years old in this movie. But yeah, I'm perfectly willing to accept that Charming's the kind of guy who'll jump over a wall and start singing to a lady, or find a pretty corpse in a box and say, here's someone I want to kiss.
And if we're talking about it as a children's movie, a lot of those come with a message for somebody, and there's no good message to be had in this. The whole thing is that the queen is so jealous of Snow White's beauty that she tries to have her killed. The only thing of value in this entire movie is her physical appearance, and everyone is just completely over the wall with her. There's no message, so there's no moral to be told to kids. It's just, here's a bunch of assorted songs that we strung together around this narrative, which, as I said, is half the narrative of the original story. Not that the original story had a whole hell of a lot more, but it certainly explained that, she did have a dad, and what was he doing this whole time, quite frankly? Oh yeah, sure, you can just have your stepdaughter be a scullion maid for whatever reason. I'm not too concerned with what happens to her, I guess.
I realize that with old movies, there's a different cadence of speech. There's definitely a different style of singing. But I found it so difficult to listen to Snow White talking. The voice they chose was so annoying. And I've actually heard from a number of people, when I brought up that we were talking about this movie, they're like, oh my God, she has the most annoying voice in the history of animated film.
Not in the history of animation, though. I will say, Season 3's English dub's Sailor Moon, that is the worst. That is the worst voice in all of voice acting history as far as I'm concerned. I couldn't watch the show. Also, I guess I just admitted that I watched Sailor Moon.
I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I'm partial to Sailor Mars myself. Another thing I'm partial to is supporting the show on iTunes. So if you enjoy the content we're producing here on FYC, the best way to support us is to go to iTunes, if that's where you get your content from. Rate and review the show. It only takes a second. It's easy to do, and it really helps us out. Also, for anyone who goes to that extra trouble, to show our appreciation, we will give you a shout-out on a future episode with all the bragging rights that entails. Thanks in advance, and now back to the show. Now, we've been kind of hard on this movie, and I do think we should point out some of the good things. And I think we did sort of talk a little bit about the quality of animation. I'm still just floored and thrilled with any of the scenes between the Queen and the mirror. I love the animation. I love the set design, the lighting. Like, there's a lot of texture and drama, and there's just a really nice tone to those scenes that you don't really get with the singing and the dancing with the dwarves. And again, maybe I'm old and jaded and I just don't care about those songs, but I just spent so much time craving for story that anytime one of those scenes came on, I just glommed onto it and soaked in absolutely everything I could off of it.
And you can't deny the cultural significance it has as the first feature-length animated film. Had it bombed, what would have happened to animated films? Obviously, no one would want to be throwing money into that. Oh, look, here's the film that sank an entire company, and obviously that doesn't sell, so let's get rid of it. No, it succeeded, and it carried forward, and it's important culturally for everything that's come since when it comes to animation, but watching the actual film itself, there's not much to it.
I think I want to see you write that fanfic where it's a world without Disney. But yeah, I honestly think it's on this list specifically for its cultural and artistic significance. And unfortunately, that's not one of the criteria that we're really hung up on. And I think the foundation of this episode, the script, doesn't exist.
To give it the number one spot on AFI's top 10 animated films of all time, it's almost insanity. Even though they're taking off, animated films from all around the world, and in North America, animated films are usually seen with a bit more disdain, as though it's not possible to be serious. And that's sort of the context for how people thought of animation when Snow White did come out. As I said, you had your Looney Tunes, your slapstick comedy. It was pretty much Three Stooges all day long.
Cartoons were shorts before films.
But nowadays, if a movie like Snow White were to come out in theaters, no one would see it. A few critics would see it. They might say a thing or two about the songs themselves, but it would not hold water.
As much as I'm not a fan of the musical sequences in the movie, I do give it some props because the staging of it, the execution of it, and there are a couple songs in that movie that people still talk about or sing or know. They're still part of our cultural DNA, if you will.
Everybody knows, hi ho, it's off to work we go. That's just almost a given here.
But the whole thing really boils down to me as it's a couple of set pieces. You can kind of tell that it was put together by storyboard artists. And they were really just concerned with, can we pull this off and how do we pull this off? And I think the reason why people are remembering it the way that they do is because of where it sits in film history.
Or maybe even like myself, they're mixing up Snow White with Sleeping Beauty all the time. That is a problem I have. It's ridiculous.
And in those conversations that I mentioned before, where people are talking about how annoying Snow White's voice is, they're usually of a mind to say that the film is not very good, and there's usually another Disney movie they're willing to pick up and throw in. I mean, honestly, you could throw Pinocchio in there, you could throw Dumbo in there. My personal favorite, Sleeping Beauty, from that first 15, 20 years of making movies. And yeah, I just don't think it's fair to be putting this one on the pedestal that it's being put on.
It's not first come, first serve.
I think there was something that I wanted to talk about with just living in the dwarves' house for a day was kind of creepy.
It's as though these dwarves don't know. At one point, it's like they're shocked that there's a girl. They don't know what it is. What is this thing? Which makes me wonder who they're supposed to be selling all these gems to. Because they've got the greatest mine in the world. I mean, they come out pre-cut. This stuff is fantastic. But they also don't understand cleaning and cooking. I have no idea how they survive from day to day. Who's in charge of any of that? Where they get their food, for that matter.
The animals bring it to them.
The animals seemed scared as heck of them. They just loved Snow White because, once again, she's the greatest in the world. Why? Because she's the prettiest. She's white as snow, hair as black as raven, lips as red as apples. Of course, that's only in the actual fairy tale, but there's no particular reason to care about this person.
Yeah, for as surprised as the dwarves were in how to deal with this new entity that's come into their lives, they really did have a lot of classic gender-specific niceties that they made sure that Snow White got to sleep in their beds. Maybe I think I'm grasping.
I know Grumpy actually would sit around talking about how, oh, you can't trust them women. They'll vex you. They'll turn you right around and you won't know it's up and down no more. And he was upset that he had to clean up and Everyone else was willing to trip over themselves in hopes of getting a kiss on the forehead. Even Grumpy would do that near the end as well, although pretending like he didn't care. So all they knew was that here's somebody who came into our place, cooked, clean, and is pretty, and did everything they could for her.
How many other girls have come through there? Because of the way I'm feeling about this movie and responded to this movie, I kind of almost feel like it would make a more interesting episode if you and I sat down and came up with a list of movies, animated films, that would better fit this number 34 spot on the AFI Top 100.
So at the end of the day, is it a classic? I'm going to obviously have to say no. It's obviously a landmark film, and it's very important culturally, and it was a first of its kind. But would I recommend it to anyone today? No, not unless they were in film studies and looking up history. It's a historical artifact, and that's about all I can really say for it.
I agree. I do own this movie. I remember buying it on DVD when it came out. I think it was the Disney's Diamond Editions or Platinum Editions. I love the bonus features on it. That's mostly why I bought it. There's a couple hours of documentary and archival footage, which is amazing. I do love animation and animation history, but my kids never really watched it. I almost never put the movie in. It just, I just don't think it's a good movie, and I don't think it should be a classic. So I'm going to give it the thumbs down. And that's how the Snow White conversation went down, with both Dustin and I voting the film as a museum piece rather than a masterpiece. If you agree with our decision or just have a contrary opinion that you want to let us know, be sure to hit us up on Facebook. We're also on Twitter at FYC Show. We're on all the social media. We'd also be curious to know what you think of these Redux episodes, so feel free to send us your thoughts on that as well. Thanks to my co-host Dustin, and thank you for taking the time to listen. We'll see you next time on For Your Consideration. Take care.